we meaning South Africa, of course, has not yet discovered how not to be slaves with a white slave master in 2024. They suffer in Soweto while Orania exists. Let's first resolve this Orania issue. Now, racism in this country is illegal, but culturalism in this country isn't. It's quite genius, in fact. And they managed to find that loophole. That is my observation. Orania is not necessarily a whites-only town, although white people live there. It is an Afrikaner-only town. And there's a difference between the two. And here's the difference. They have an application process. And that application process requires that, number one, you need to be an Afrikaner, number one. And then you need to have a clear criminal record, number two. So you could be an Afrikaner, but if you have a sketchy past, there's a high probability that as Afrikaans as you are, you might not even make it into Orania. Do you understand? Now, the thing that needs to be understood is that Orania is for the preservation of Afrikaner culture, Afrikaner language, Afrikaner belief, Afrikaner law, and Afrikaner cultural expression or religious expression or whatever the case may be. That is what Orania is about. Orania is privately owned land, the same way that I, if I had the money, could buy land. I could buy maybe 6,000 square kilometers of land and territory and then simply build houses and dwellings and factories there and then say that this place or this land is for the preservation of Xhosa culture. It would be illegal for me to say that this is for the preservation of blackness because racism in South Africa is illegal. Makes sense. The town wouldn't stand. But if I said that it is to preserve the Xhosa culture, that applications would be open to Xhosa people. So if you are Zulu, as black as you are, chances are you would not be accepted. If you were Pedi, Tsonga, Tswana, Sotho, Venda, etc., you might not be accepted because it's not a town built to preserve a race. It is a town built to preserve a culture. Anybody can do that in this country, by the way. So then, this country believes in private ownership of land, by the way. So the undertone of private ownership of land is right of admission reserved, meaning you decide who gets onto your property, you decide who does not get onto your property, as long as the criteria does not infringe on the legalities and constitution of this country. Racism is constitutionally unjust in this country. Makes sense? But culturalism isn't. Now the desire, so now as white as you are, if you are white American, white French, Irish, English, Spanish, Latin or whatever, Greek, whatever the case may be, if you applied to join the Oranian community, there's a high probability that your application would not be accepted. You want to know why? It is primarily because if you are, for example, an English white person, you being there will undermine the reason as to why Orania was established in the first place. It's Afrikaans people who happen to be white. The same way I'm a Xhosa man who happens to be black. Do you understand me? Xhosa in and of itself is not what makes me black. Black is my racial classification. Xhosa is my cultural classification. White does not necessarily make you Afrikaner. Afrikaner is a cultural classification, white being the racial classification. I hope we are now kind of understanding it. Now, for most South Africans, the desire to live in Orania specifically is about as much as our desire to live in America. And not in America, sorry, to live in Nigeria. It's next to nothing. They're not bothering anybody. Do you understand? So they managed to find a clever little loophole, which is ingenious, actually, and I, for one, respect it. I respect intelligence, no matter what the motive behind it is. Anyway, now let's deal with the slave part. under apartheid, the poverty statistics of black people were sitting at over 90%. The population density of black people in this country is sitting at 44 million currently, with 65% of that 44 million living beneath the poverty line, making up approximately 28.6 or 28.4 million, give or take. Black people are living beneath the poverty line. Now, that leaves 35% of the black contingent of the South African society at the middle or upper echelons of economic society, above the poverty line. So you're looking at about 14.6 million black people, which is actually more than the population density numerically by number, not percentage-wise, more than the population density of white people combined. Do you understand? So there are more black people who are well-to-do in South Africa than white people holistically. Numerically, someone is going to miss this part. This is why I'm stressing it. It's really important. South Africans, thanks to Nelson Mandela, understand that revolution is evolution and it is a process. Do you understand? Not a moment. Most African countries made the mistake of making the revolution a moment as opposed to it being a process. Make sense? The reason why it is a process, and it has always been a process, it is that Africans in general were not trained to understand the intricacies of economic sustenance and development and subsequent sustenance. Africans were not trained to understand the intricacies of political development and sound political sustenance. They were not trained, we were not trained, our ancestors were not trained to understand the intricacies of international diplomacy and forging profitable, meaningful diplomatic ties with other countries or with other nationalities. So that's why when Nigeria decided to take over everything all at once, the Nigerian economy eventually shriveled up into a big lump of nothing, from which many Nigerian people are running. The same thing happened to our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe and in many parts of the world. They knew that all they needed to do was to take the strategic means of production away or take themselves away with their skills, and the people will be left fighting each other. If South Africa had made the same move as Nigeria, South Africa would be in the same shoes as Nigeria. It is insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. South Africa and America are experiencing a different outcome because we have chosen a different path. Do you understand? That is why in South Africa we have coined the term "Julle weet nie wat ons weet." So if you truly were free men, then the mineral resources that are being mined under the soles of your feet would show in the way in which you live your lives. There are proceeds from the mineral resources. The stuff is still being mined and still being traded and still being refined and still being sold, and yet certain individuals profit and you don't. You know why? Because you still live under the illusion of ownership and you are and you have been put to sleep. If you truly were free men, the black American slaves and the black South African slaves, we would be tripping over ourselves seeking refuge from free men. But we're not. It's the other way around. It's not by their words that ye shall know them. It's by their fruits. God bless you all.